Good evening, Chelsea fans. A mixed week for Liam Rossinia's plucky Blues. Dumped out of the Carabao Cup semi-final second leg by the great Satan Arsenal and Kai Havertz, but back on track in the Premier League with a win over Wolves at Molineux to make it four on the trot for Liam Rossinia as Chelsea manager. We'll be reviewing the week just gone and discuss the top five race for UCL qualification as a clearer picture now starts to emerge in terms of who is contending for those much prized places for automatic qualification. Let's jump into it.
Wolves 1, Chelsea 3. A Cole Palmer first half hat-trick at Molineux secures consecutive, comfortable away wins for Chelsea. How do you see this one, Ryan?
I think this one was as ideal a game as any for Chelsea, particularly at this point in time, given the fixture overload and the congestion we've had in recent weeks. I think this is probably the only game in the Premier League, if any, that a team such as Chelsea and those around us could probably play in first or second gear and still come away with a win. We know that's rare in the Premier League that you can turn up with that sort of mentality and level of approach. But this is basically how it materialised for Chelsea on Saturday. Very slow start. It looked like Wolves are much hungrier than us, much more energetic, beating us to every 50-50 and frequently getting the ball in our box from sort of crosses, long throws, corners, which were multiplying in the first 10 minutes. But I think anyone wondering at that point how Wolves have found themselves in this bleak situation quickly found out with two utterly ridiculous concessions and penalties from Matt Doherty and Mosquera. João Pedro on the receiving end of both errors there, and Palmer ultimately the beneficiary with two penalties dispatched and a unerring finish to make it a hat trick in the first half. Not for the first time. I think it's his third or fourth hat trick for Chelsea, three of which have been in one half, which is ridiculous, albeit two penalties on this occasion. On Palmer, we obviously mentioned last week on the pod that he was playing at probably 30 or 40% of his physical potential at the moment, and his interview with BBC for Match of the Day after the match pretty much confirmed that. So I'm reluctant to announce at this stage that Palmer is back, but this was certainly a step in the right direction, and piece by piece he's finding himself again. Second half, I think the fatigue that I mentioned from the fixture overload in recent weeks with that heavy domestic and European schedule really became evident and really set in for us. We were on the back foot for a large part of that second half. Sloppy goal concession once again, a nothing cross from a corner which gets flicked on and panic stations in the box, and you could just see the frustration on Sanchez's face, almost looking to scrap with one of the Chelsea defenders. So that is an issue. It had real parallels to the 3-1 win over Crystal Palace, where we conceded a ridiculous goal towards the end there and let go of the clean sheet. Do want to call out Andre Santos, not a player who particularly catches the eye in terms of his shooting, his skill or his flair or anything like that. Doesn't tend to drop the shoulder like a certain Romeo Lavia and make the highlight reels, but he really is demonstrating great capability to do the basics well, and is absolutely what we've been crying out for as a team, to slot in that midfield alongside Caicedo to screen the midfield and provide the cover that we desperately need, and which ultimately unlocks players like Palmer and Enzo Fernandez to wreak havoc behind enemy lines. So job done. Far tougher test to come, but yeah, we'll take the 3 points and four wins on the bounce.
I think it's a great call out, Reed Santos. We've cried on many occasions for that three-man midfield. I thought he was really assured once again, albeit against lowly Wolves. That clean sheet wipe late, as you say again. I mean, Sanchez rightly enraged, while not proving costly for the time being. I think that's four Prem wins in a row for Azenya. As that fixture swing turns in March, we're going to need more concentration at the back. I think we're still searching for that centre back pairing, that formula that I'm hoping Rosenia will stick with longer term. And I just think an accumulation of clean sheets kind of really adds to confidence in the back line that we're going to need in some of those tougher fixtures. The headline, as you mentioned, simply has to be Cole Palmer. I think that is four Premier League hat-tricks, and I believe he is the first in Prem history to score three within the first half, which is sensational. I think it also brought up 50 Premier League goals for Chelsea, better than a 1-in-2 ratio, which is absolutely phenomenal. I know we're sort of gutted to see him in his current state, far from his former self, and I guess sort of refreshing for him to concede that within the interview. He's well aware he's not at the levels he wants to be at, but seemed to have confidence that he can get there. But ultimately, I am just really pleased to see a smile back on his face. I was less pleased, however, to see Enzo Fernandez jump on him after that third goal. I got PTSD and
Daryl Hatter.
shades
Yeah.
of Jorrel Hatto after that Liverpool win.
Yeah. George, I know you've been advocating for limited rotation in this schedule from obviously midweek to the weekend domestic fixtures. I think you'd have been pleased when you saw that lineup come out, obviously with the notable absence of Reece James, but I think it was just the one change from the Carabao Cup game previous Tuesday against Arsenal with Liam Delap stepping away from his right wing role for Palmer to come in for this game.
Crucial. We're coming to the business end of the season now. We're going to discuss in our topic the equation in the league, obviously still alive in domestic and European competition as well. But this really now is the time for Rosenia to find his 11 and start to stick with that, particularly, I believe, with the FA Cup fixture upcoming and a couple of weeks of reduced fixture schedule. It's great to get that cohesion among the side. That one negative you mentioned, however, Reece James, his omission, I think all but confirms that he very much wasn't rested for that Arsenal game. I have to say, I thought that was pretty inflammatory language ahead of that tie. I'd rather the club were frank with us on Reece James's fitness. We know his physical state feels as if it's going to forever be precarious, but I think a bit of transparency there goes a long way.
Have you seen Liam Rossinia's quote today on Reece James's prospects of playing tomorrow night? He said, obviously, in the post-match following the Wolves game that he very narrowly missed out on a fitness test, but it was touch and go and very likely to come in for Leeds. And it's come to light today that he's succumbed to some kind of illness, we're hearing, and he's now in a fight to feature tomorrow against Leeds. So it feels like we've seen with Esteval. It feels like you know, 50 shades of excuses that we're seeing for players not to feature. Arsenal 1, Chelsea nil. Dumped out of the Carabao Cup in rather sickening fashion with a sucker punch in the 97th minute from the old enemy, Kai Havertz. Less said about him, the better, frankly. George, you were there in the away end. Talk us through it.
You encapsulated it perfectly. A real sickener. Who else but Kai Havertz to turn the knife on the Blues right at the depth? As you say, I had the pleasure, should I say, displeasure of being in-house at the Emirates for this one. And I actually thought it was a relatively competent showing, all things considered. I think it's fair to say there were murmurs of discontent with the lineup. I mentioned that inflammatory Reece being rested statement to really grind the gears of the away contingent. But notably, that shift to an experimental back three, the trial of a formation that definitely did not fare well for Leeds just a few days earlier, battered at home by Arsenal. But it did largely keep Arsenal at bay. I think even Declan Rice conceded so much in an interview post game. But ultimately, this is a cup tie. We failed to progress and we were toothless in attack. It wasn't helped by that Liam Delap right wing shift. I mean, shocking. It was really sort of ominous for me that Achimpong showed far more threat and technical ability operating in similar spaces in that first leg, which I thought was ridiculous in itself. But Delap was utterly helpless. I don't think he beat Hincapié once made him look like a world beater. Bar the lap, I say, I thought we kept it tight, had a couple of hot shots from range from Enzo, and ultimately Rosenia played for a 45, if not 30-minute game with that double substitution that finally came of Esteval and Cole Palmer. But I think it's fair to say Arsenal are not the opposition to reduce the length of the match and back yourself to find a breakthrough. They are seriously rigid, resolute, well-drilled outfit. The main frustration for me was not to test Kepa, given his well-known vulnerabilities. But ultimately, shy of that sickening Havertz dagger at the last, wasn't too displeased. How did you see it?
I want to touch on one point you mentioned there, Kepa in goal. We know how rigid and resolute this Arsenal defence and the whole team is really, but with Kepa in goal, there is always a chance by spamming crosses into the box, but more pertinently by spamming shots in his goal from distance. And we actually had a number of opportunities, good, decent opportunities with sight of goal that I think on every occasion pretty much fell to Enzo Fernandez, and we praised him at length recently, but he just doesn't seem to have that skill set in his repertoire. The long shot, does he? Which how many times did Frank get us out of a hole with a 25-yard, you know, peach of a shot that makes his way past the keeper? We just don't tend to see that. We've seen Enzo really refine his sort of box crashing abilities, and he does that really well these days. His overall finishing has improved, notwithstanding the Rabona against Wolves. But yeah, just three or four clear sights of goal and didn't hit the target once. Well, I think he did, and it was pretty limp to be honest. But yeah, really, really disappointed with that. I totally understood the setup from Rossignol by the end of the game, or by minute 60. The plan was clearly to frustrate Arsenal, not concede any space to be. We tried to reinvent the wheel slightly on the set pieces, a theme we've spoken about in the podcast as well. Pulling three players out of the box up the pitch to drag players out of the box from an Arsenal perspective and an opposition perspective, and create space for Sanchez, and that seemed to work, and generated quite a lot of praise actually from wider footballing discourse. And ultimately, we got where we wanted to be. 30 minutes to go in the game. Bring on the cavalry, Esteban Palmer. I think ultimately we just didn't have the wherewithal to create chances, and that's what it came down to. And you get stung on the break, and that's that. I do find the reaction to Chelsea losses from our own fan base, not necessarily those in the stadium, but on Twitter and the discourse you see there, but also the wider footballing community. I just find it hysterical. I don't know if you've noticed it recently, but it always feels like the end of the world and the total pandemonium when Chelsea lose. It's quite remarkable, to be honest. I can't quite put my finger on it.
Absolutely. I think specifically the Paul Merson criticism, Rosenia answered perfectly. I think benefit of hindsight, yes, you fly out the blocks, you really put the pressure on early. And yes, we did need longer to attempt to break down this Arsenal side. It did look as if we were lost, lacking for ideas beyond the pot shots. I totally agree with you. Our lack of sort of plan in wider areas, manipulating that ball to get the crosses in. I think we saw Garnacho come on and take up some decent positions, but ultimately wasn't trusted by teammates, something we've touched on in the past, and I'm sure we'll cover again. But yeah, Newcastle very much showed that being overzealous and flying out the blocks can see the tie wrapped up in a matter of minutes. That humbling 5-0 loss at the Emirates a few years back could easily have been on the cards again had we taken a different approach. And I could very much wager Chelsea fans and rival fans would have been scrutinising and ridiculing a loss akin to that one with much more vigour. I do think, however, the reaction from Chelsea fans, the kind of heightened rage, is very much in the context of that simply shocking head-to-head record now against Arsenal. I think it's 10 competitive matches without a win against the Gunners. Feels like we're sort of forever out of form or forced to field suboptimal lineups against them. I think I discussed it with Charlie a couple of episodes back. Tuchel kind of experimenting with makeshift backlines and Malang Sarr when we potentially had priorities elsewhere, giving Arteta a lifeline to really kick on and become the club today. We saw a Badia Shield, the Sassy disaster class I referenced, and this week we've had to endure Liam Delap at right wing. Ultimately, say that record is utterly unacceptable. And I sort
You
of
make such a good point. All these ridiculous lineups down the years have just now germinated and festered into this horrible trend that we can't buck now, which is, I think 4 or 5 years, you said, without a win over Arsenal. The likes of Tuchel, Lampard really have a lot to answer for, I think. It's dreadful. One day we'll get there.
I have to hope we do finally end that hoodoo when it really matters, be it to sort of derail their title charge this year, or even better for me, maybe that European sparkle, a Champions League night,
Wayne Bridge.
might be that energy that we need to finally get one over them and stay the only team in London with a European Cup. Another painful topic, but I think we have to go there. Kai Havertz. How has this whipped into a situation that's become? I find it utterly perplexing how determined he is to piss on his legacy for the Blues. On paper, he should be totally immortal among Chelsea faithful, given that goal in Porto. But I feel like he's extrapolated a couple of tweets from a few trolls on Twitter, extrapolated that for the whole Chelsea fan base. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if Arteta's whipped up a PowerPoint or two, sort of echoing this in his ears. But I just find the whole situation utterly bizarre.
Nothing to add if you've captured it entirely. There's something odd and evil about this way he's completely turned on his erstwhile club where he won the Champions League. It's the spark that lights his fire, isn't it, Chelsea? It's where he gets m most his joy and seems to deliver his best performances in an Arsenal shirt, and it is fueled by hatred, which I'm pretty sure is born out of Arteta's cultish behavior as a manager and a dictator, to be honest.
So once again, it looks like fifth place in the league will all but confirm Champions League football for next season. I think slash hope City are now out of the picture and firmly in a title race with Arsenal. And while mathematically there's still a fair few in the equation, I'm probably looking down to Brentford, Everton at a push. How do you see it, Ryan?
It's interesting. I'm having to adjust my vocabulary with this one now. For how many years have we said top four, and ultimately it looks like it is now forevermore going to be a top five that we're focusing on in the context of Champions League qualification since this new extended format launched. So many teams in contention, similar to last year, and the professional and the financial stakes are so high now. I think we are in a position at this point in start of February in the Premier League where anything from Aston Villa in third to Sunderland in ninth are technically in contention for, and vying for these places now. So Villa on 47 points, in third place all the way down to Sunderland on 36. But from a Chelsea perspective, it ultimately feels like a direct shootout now between Aston Villa, United, and Liverpool for three spaces. So one of those giants of English football is ultimately going to miss out. In terms of how Chelsea are primed at this point in time, four wins on the bounce in the Premier League, coming off the back of pretty generous run of fixtures, Leeds and Burnley at home to come in the next 5 days. So I think there is a serious opportunity now to create a bit of a buffer and a gap to Liverpool in sixth. We know where Liverpool are at now. Pretty dreadful run of form. Losing the game against City in quite ignominious fashion on Sunday on in the Super Sunday slot without Szoboszlai now. United, I think 1 game a week tax means they're probably a shoe-in, particularly given their shrewd summer recruitment and the transition away from Amorim to Carrick and his much simpler approach. Aston Villa, I think, is a real interesting case study here. Um, we know that they have been absolutely decimated in midfield now with Camara, Tielemans, and McGinn all likely to miss, if not the remainder of the season, a large chunk of that. Overlay that with the fact they're in the Europa League still. likely to go far in that, given the teams in that competition. We know what happened to them last year. They fell off a cliff and ultimately bottled it on the last day of the league with a at Old Trafford with that Emi Martinez red card. So I think there's a lot of dynamics here. But I'm actually looking at Villa as the team most likely to drop out, and I think Liverpool probably could regain a little bit of form. But for Chelsea, it's a great opportunity now. But you've mentioned it earlier, George, the tilt in our fortunes in the fixtures from about March time, it gets pretty ominous. So I think right now we need to just keep the wins going.
I think Merce once again commented that the next two for Chelsea simply have to be 6 points. Otherwise, he's writes us off in theory. So Leeds, Burnley at home, totally agree. Represents the end of the most favourable of opening runs for Rosenia. As we touched upon, I'm just very much hoping that this has been a nice kind of ease into life and understanding of his players, and Chelsea finally settling on a first 11 or a first sort of 12, 13 that's going to be really competitive in the league and then also compete in both domestic and European competition. That March run, however, kicks off with a daunting trip to the Emirates, which has every potential to kind of derail or ignite our season. It is Villa away just 3 days later. And I think I'm tempted to say I'm with you that they're the one that I see sliding down the table again and potentially bottling. I say bottling with asterisk here because the likes of Tielemans, Kamara, etc., are so pivotal for them, have in gutting fashion for them, face kind of long terms on the sideline. But Liverpool, just having a quick kind of flick through the fixtures, face, I would argue, their four prime contenders for that berth in the last four games of the season. So I'm hoping their kind of struggles, depression last night with that late City spin, potentially a critical Szoboszlai suspension could mean that they sort of fumble a little bit now and potentially leave themselves a little bit too much to do in that final stretch.
Yep.
So I'm giving you call them Villa. I'm going to call for Liverpool meltdown with Arne Slot switching his focus between Champions League and Prem and potentially even facing an early exit. I think it pays me to say United are the absolute banker, flying at the minute, once a week tax, and they've just got goal threat in abundance up
Yep.
top. And I'm going to back us with João Pedro sharpening his skill set, injury permitting, to kind of fire us home. And I'm really looking for Esteval and Cole Palmer to kind of really contribute to the levels we know and probably expected more from them this season.
Leeds tomorrow night. Kind of, we say this every game, but does kind of feel like the biggest game of our season. When with all that in mind, doesn't it? I mean, the opportunity we have to create that buffer with Liverpool struggling and down on the dumps. Thursday, I think it's Wednesday night. They've got Sunderland away without Szoboszlai. That looks tricky, and we could be 7 points ahead of them at that point with Burnley at home to come. This feels like the moment where we have to create that buffer that will sustain us in that period where fixtures start to turn on us. I think Newcastle are out, aren't they? They're looking towards relegation zone with Spurs and Brighton et al.
A classic football cliche, no game more important than your next one. And I'm very much sure it's one that we will see trotted out by Rosenia in many a pre-game match conference upcoming. Time now for the opposition view. Up next for the Blues is Dirty Leeds at the Bridge tomorrow night. To preview this one, we've got returning Leeds fan and housemate Declan Burke. Welcome back, mate.
Cheers, George. Good to be back.
Convincing 3-1 win at Ellen Road against relegation rivals Forest on Friday. I imagine you're feeling a little more punchy regarding Leeds' prospects for this pod.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a huge win. Great performance as well. It takes us to 29 points. It's only 2 off the points tally we had last time we were in the Prem. I think it's enough to have kept us up last season also. Slightly worried about a resurgent West Ham. I think it could be a harder season than normal to stay up, but we're still 3, maybe 4 wins away from definitely staying up. We've still got the likes of Burnley and Wolves to play at the fortress that is Ellen Road as well. So yeah, I'm pretty confident about survival.
The reverse fixture spelled the beginning of the end for Maresca. I think we were blown away at Ellen Road, admittedly following a wholesale rotation, potentially some underestimation from him. But ultimately, we were bullied by Leeds. I think we saw that back 3, back 5 with 2 up top for the first time, correct me if I'm wrong, and just completely bullied us. I think Leeds were 4 games, 4 losses, headed into that tie. And ultimately, that Chelsea win was the catalyst for a 7-game unbeaten run that has you sitting semi-pretty at the minute. Has this been the winning formula for Leeds?
Yeah, definitely. So it was actually the game before against Man City. At half-time, purely out of desperation, we went to a 3-5-2 and nearly managed to spin them. But like you said, it was the Chelsea game. There was the first game, it was successfully implemented and we went on to win. And we haven't really looked back since. Other than the blip against Arsenal last week. I think a 4-3 loss to Newcastle at St James's as well. They're the only games we've lost since November. With some electric performances in that time as well. So it's been great viewing over the festive period and beyond. Yeah, I was very negative last time I was on the pod, so I'd actually like to take this opportunity to give a public apology to Daniel Farke and Dominic Calvert-Lewin, who are both absolutely smashing it right now.
I think it's fair to say stocks were down on both of those. Daniel Farke perhaps unfairly tagged a Championship manager, not cut out for the Premier League after failings with Norwich City. And Dominic Calvert-Lewin, I mean, his prime was a fair few years back now, but we're now looking at a new prime. Not long ago, he was an injury sick note, and now you're looking at potentially an England recall. Safe to say I'd trade League One Liam in for him in a heartbeat. So we've had the view on Leeds. What are your revised thoughts on the circus that is Chelsea FC? Particularly, I guess, the Liam Rosenior appointment.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So I feel like last time I was on the pod, you've dropped down a bit in terms of the table. Although you do seem a little bit resurgent under Rosenior. I must admit I did find it a very strange appointment at the time. It felt a little bit unambitious, and I really didn't understand the 6-year contract. I don't know the ins and outs of football finance, but it seemed crazy that a manager that seemed destined to be sacked by the end of the season got such a long contract. So despite the ups and downs of Chelsea, I think you'll probably creep into the top 5 come the end of the season. Secure Champions League football, and then I guess in the summer you can continue the perennial rebuild that is Chelsea FC.
So let's get on to predictions for tomorrow night. So obviously they won't have that fervent, hostile Ellen Road atmosphere behind them. But how do you see this game playing out, and what is your final scoreline prediction?
So I'm going to be less negative than the last prediction. I think, spurred on by that victory against Forest, the pressure feels off a little bit. It feels more like of a free hit against Chelsea. I think it's going to be a fierce game. 2 old rivals battling it out. I think ultimately we'll sneak it 2-1. I predict a first half headed goal from a corner by Leeds, followed by a Chelsea equaliser. Then I fancy Calvert-Lewin to snatch a late winner at the end.
I have to say, Ryan and I were just in the previous section discussing how crucial 3 points here and again against Burnley at home on Friday are in terms of our Champions League prospects. And it does very much feel like slight banana skin potential. But I'm going to back the boys to continue the winning run. I'm going to go for João Pedro and Cole Palmer picking up where he left off against Wolves, with a late Dominic Calvert-Lewin consolation goal. No doubt from a corner, set piece, an area we've been afraid of late, to keep tensions high at the bridge. But ultimately I'm backing the Blues to continue that winning run and get the job done. I have to say, for all the animosity, the great rival, I would love it if you guys stayed up, particularly at the expense of West Ham. Our record at Ellen Road's been shocking of late, but ultimately those are the ties that make the Premier League what it is. And fair play, I think Ellen Road is right up there in terms of atmospheres in the league. And I wonder how fervent those Leeds away fans will be come Tuesday. I have to say that Sunderland away contingent holds the mantle at the minute, but wouldn't be surprised if Leeds come close. Cheers, mate.
Thanks a lot. I'll see you tomorrow.
Catch you there. Hope you have a terrible evening beyond our pint.
You too, mate.